Hello gamers and welcome to another episode of the Monthly Meta, where we go ahead and talk about the most popular decks in each class. For those of you who are unfamiliar about this video, how it's set up and what we do, we're going to go through basically, like I mentioned, each class and talk about the most popular decks. With talking about the most popular decks, this kind of limits out the decks that you don't really see that often, because I can't include every single deck that's currently found in Hearthstone, as that would take a very, very long time and it wouldn't really help you out so much. So we're going to talk about basically when you go into ladder or ranked play, these are going to be 90% of the decks you're going to see. We're going to bring up the deck list, we're going to talk about the cards within each deck, why it's so good, and the win condition that it has. So without further ado, let's head into Shaman as our first one. Face Shaman to be exact. This deck runs very, very similar to its counterpart, the mid-range Shaman, with a few changes in it. We have cards such as the Lava Burst, the 4-drop 7/7. We've got the Argent Horse Riders and things of that nature. So basically this, from the early game until about turn 4, you're playing creatures, trying to deal as much damage to face as possible, making as minimal trades as possible, unless it's a very good value trade that you can take up. Once you've done around 10 to 15 points of damage to your opponent's face, you can start whipping out the lightning bolts, the spirit claws, the lava bursts, and everything like that, and start directing it so very nicely at your opponent's life total. From there, you're going to be able to basically burst your opponent down with a 1 to 2 turn combo. The only kind of weird cards that I've included in this particular Face Shaman list is the Acidic Swamp Ooze and also the Unbound Elemental. So if you don't like these cards and you want to put in Doomhammer for that extra face, you can go right ahead. Also keep in mind that these deck lists are made by me. These are my deck lists that I would play as if I was a Face Shaman. So just take it for what it is. The core of the deck is still there with some minor changes. The reason the Acidic is in there is because of so many Shamans on ladder and the fact that every Shaman plays Spirit Claws, and what can piss someone off more than using an Acidic Swamp Ooze to destroy their beloved Spirit Claws. So that we moved away from Face Shaman. Mid-range Shaman is basically the better version of this in my opinion. The Face Shaman kind of fizzles out as the mid-range Shaman. Not only has almost the exact same cards and can do the exact same thing, it has the ability to survive even in the late game or even in the control matchups, which a lot of decks can't do. Like, the flexibility of mid-range Shaman is absolutely phenomenal. It's what makes this deck the #1 deck right now, is the fact that you can play it control, you can play it aggro, you can play it mid-range. It doesn't matter. It's like a fucking Ditto in Pokemon. It does whatever you want it to do as long as you know what the fuck you're doing. So with that, as you can see, it has the very same core as the Face Shaman with some minor changes, more so at the mid to late game, such as the Hex. You see stuff like Thunderbluff Valiant for the basically infinite value, because every turn you can use your hero power to buff your totems up to either make trades or go face. The Fire Elementals, the Ragnaros, the Fire Lord, which is basically your big finisher. The Barns in the deck, there's been a lot of question and speculation of hi, my name is blank. Let's say my name is Little Timmy, and I'm wondering why Barnes is in this deck. The reason being is you can pull a Ragnaros from your deck, you can pull a Thunderbluff, you can pull an Azure Drake, even Totem Golem if you have a Thunderbluff out for the buffs, Flame Tongue Totem, not Maelstrom Portal, but even the Mana Tide Totem, the Tunnel Trog. There's a lot of cards in this deck that even if you pull a 1/1 version of them out, you can still hero power, or if they live on the board, they actually do something just beyond them being a 1/1. So the Barnes is actually really, really powerful in the mid-range Shaman, which is very surprising, and it definitely helps the deck out a lot. But I think what makes this deck the most powerful is that this is one of the decks that almost every creature in it, if you leave it on the field, it gets better and better, or it just keeps generating value. For example, Tunnel Trog. Every time you use an Overload, it gains an attack. Flame Tongue Totem. It allows you to make trades with cards that normally don't have an attack. You look at cards like Mana Tide Totem, which literally generate a card for you every turn. So it's just every card you're being able to draw, you're playing cards, and you're basically just refilling your hand. And if your opponent, there's no class that can keep up with a 2-to-1 card ratio unless you're playing against a Zoo Warlock. And even then, they're spending 2 mana and 2 life to generate that extra card, while Mana Tide can just sit there and just eat up all the card draw. Nom nom noms. All right, so we got Thunderbluff. Like I said, there's just so many cards in this deck that just generate so much value if they're not dealt with, which makes this, again, the #1 deck at the moment. So for those of you who are going to ask, what is the best deck in Hearthstone? You're staring at it right here. Whether or not you want to change out a couple cards here and there, there's about 3 or 4 cards in this deck that you can change out and nothing will happen to the win. It's all preference. As long as you keep the Thing from Belows, the Thunder Bluffs, the Totem Golems, the Tunnel Trogs, the Maelstrom Portals, all of this, basically the staples in the deck, it will perform very, very well. Moving to, I believe, the Druid class, we're looking at the Malygos Druid, which is, again, I would have to say in the tier 2, falls below the mid-range Shaman in regards to how well it's doing right now, but still a very powerful deck. What's actually interesting is Malygos Druid used to be a kind of meme deck, a deck that you would play just for fun. It wouldn't be that competitive. It was a good deck, but it was never considered one of the best. But now, for whatever reason, this deck has come up. It has surpassed the Yogg Druid, it has surpassed the Token Druid, and it is now considered one of the best Druid decks and one of the best decks at the moment. Not as good as the mid-range, but keep in mind, still good at that. So the win condition of this deck, like you can imagine, is playing Malygos, being able to use Emperor Thaurissan to discount cards such as Living Roots. You really don't need to discount the Moonfires because they're free to begin with, but if you can drop the Malygos and play maybe 2 Moonfires and a Living Roots in the same turn for like around 20 damage burst, depending on whether or not you have an Azure Drake out or things of that nature already on the board, you're going to be able to do a sizable amount of burst damage. On top of that, the entire deck revolves around you also being able to ramp. So you have cards such as the Wild Growth, the Innervates, and these where are you Mire Keepers to be able to generate free mana to be able to play some of your larger creatures earlier on. This particular deck list is from Show, the streamer. It's a very good deck list at the moment. You can actually remove the Curator and the Savage Combatant and whatnot and replace those with other cards if you'd like, but currently this deck list seems to be performing very well, so I figured I'd pop this up, as I am no professional Malygos Druid player. We've played it quite a bit and we did fairly well with it, but by any means I think this is getting a deck list from someone who actually knows what the fuck they're doing in regards to this particular deck, I think is the best route there. So that basically goes over the Malygos Druid. Heading into the Token Druid, I actually prefer this deck over the Malygos, just in my opinion, because I think it's a lot more fun to play. But the problem is right now that the fact there's a lot of warriors and there's a lot of shamans, and both those classes have a large amount of field removal, whether you're talking about Brawl, Revenge, Maelstrom Portal, or Lightning Storm, and it kind of makes summoning a bunch of tokens and buffing them not so well because they just get cleared off the following turn. So this deck was good when Maelstrom Portal and Shamans weren't Shamans were always number 1 for a while now, but they didn't have Maelstrom Portal, and Warriors, they were prominent, but they weren't like as much as we see them today. So the Token Druid has definitely fallen out of favor in regards to which Druid deck is the best because of how much field clear there is. But if you can go against maybe a deck that doesn't have so much field clear, such as maybe the Hunters, the Rogues, and whatnot, maybe even another Druid, the Token Druid is definitely very powerful. And what's also good about the Token Druid is the fact that when you're going up against someone and they're expecting it to be a Malygos Druid, it has a lot of the same cards as Malygos Druid, but then you drop like a Violet Teacher and you make like 4 cards and then you buff them up with Power of the Wild, your opponent's like, well, shit, I played this as if he was playing Malygos, and he's not playing Malygos. I think I just fucked myself. So keep in mind that even playing some of the decks that aren't tier 1 or are considered the best, you can actually gain quite a bit of an advantage by playing a deck, off the curve, because your opponents will not play so much around it, because they'll just think you're playing what everybody else is playing. All right, moving into the next one, the Beast Druid. This kind of goes in the same light as what I was just speaking with catching people off guard. So when you go against another player, they'll mulligan as if you're playing maybe a more control mid-game-ish Druid deck, but then when you start playing cards such as the Enchanted Raven, Power of the Wild, Druid of the Sabers, Mounted Raptors, and you're being able to play all these early game creatures that do a sizable amount of damage, and then copy them with the Warden to make even a greater field, and then follow up with cards like Nourish to be able to redraw everything you've lost, and then drop cards like Ancient of War, Ragnaros, you're just asking for a pretty brutal game. This deck is definitely, I played it quite a few. I actually played this deck on the Legend ladder a month back, and this particular Druid deck for me did a lot of work. I think we overall had over, it was a 55% win ratio. It was around 60-65%, which is very, very good right now. And again, takes people by surprise. The deck list works very well, and in comparison to some of the other tier 1 decks, 5400 dust, yes, I know it's a lot, but it's not that expensive for what this deck can do for you. Plus, it's a lot of fun to play. I mean, slapping down a bunch of beasts and smacking your opponent in the face like a Lamau, what's there not to like? All right, so moving on to the next one, we're moving to Mage. So our first mage deck we're going to talk about is going to be the Tempo Mage. Again, this is a very powerful deck at the moment. There's a lot of tech choices in this deck. So the Rag, the Archmage, the Firelance Portal, and the Flame Strike. You can all cycle between playing 2 Firelance Portal, 1 Flame Strike, 2 Flame Strikes, 1 Firelance Portal. All of this is situational depending on the meta. The core of the deck stays the same. The core of the deck is to play a bunch of cheap spells along with your cards as Flame Waker, Archmage if you'd like, deal as much damage to your opponent's face, keep the board clear, and keep pounding them with spells basically, and being able to redraw and with your Arcane Intellect, keep the value rolling with Cabalist Tome, keep the randomness going with Babbling Book and things of that nature, so your opponent can't assume every card you have, because let's just say if you don't, like let's say you played nothing up until turn 7 with maybe a few, like a Water Elemental, and you just fizzle out, they're probably going to assume you've got like a Firelands Portal. But if you play a Babbling Book, put some random spell in your hand, you're not doing too much, it's kind of, or if you play a secret, it's really hard for your opponent to kind of guess what secret that is or what is still in your hand, because there's a little bit of randomness to the deck, and that's what Babbling Book brings, because there's been a lot of questions along with that. The Arcane Blast is basically your cheap removal for the early game in combination with Cult Sorcerer. There's been a lot of questions about the Arcane Blast. Why is that in there? It pairs well with the Azure Drake, the Blood Mage, and the Cult Sorcerer. The Flame Waker is basically a staple in the deck, considering that you can combo that with a bunch of spells. Also, there's no what is it? It's not a mirror entity, but mirror images in the deck, so you can actually include those because there's so much Warrior on ladder. So you could take out maybe a Forgotten Torch and maybe a Babbling Book if you wanted, or even an Arcane Blast to fit in 2 of the 1 mana, give yourself 0/2 taunts, so you can tuck the Flame Waker behind those. It's all up to you, but all of that is kind of tech choices depending on what you see on ladder. But this is currently my Tempo Mage build, and it's working very, very well. Moving to the next one is going to be the Freeze Mage. So this is a deck that hasn't really evolved much since the beginning of Hearthstone. Its win condition has always basically been the same. Ideally, you want to draw a bunch throughout the entire game, freeze your opponent with cards like Frost Nova, Blizzard, and then you drop Alexstrasza, reduce your opponent's health to 15, and then you double Fireball Frostbolt them for exactly 15 damage. Each game is, of course, going to go a little bit different. Sometimes the Alexstrasza will not be enough. You'll have to make Emperor Tharzan tick down specific cards in your hand, such as Ice Lance, Frostbolts, and your Roaring Torches through Forgotten Torch to be able to deal over maybe 25 points of damage if you're playing against decks like Control Paladin, where you're going to need to kill them in 1 turn from 30 health. And this is where the Evolved Kobold kind of threw in here, which is a new card to the deck in relation to how long this deck has been around. Again, the reason being is being able to OTK someone from that exactly 30 life total, which seems like, how could you do 30 damage in 1 turn? If you've got Emperor, the Evolved Kobold, and all of the Ice Lance, Frostbolts, your Fireballs, and your Roaring Torches from the Forgotten Torches in your hand, 30 damage is not so far away. Also, 1 Flame Strike, 2 is too many. The 2 Blizzards is almost necessary to freeze the field enough. In order to fit in the Cold Blood, we've actually removed one of the Novice Engineers. So depending on the meta, you can go ahead and remove 1 Alkalite, put back a Novice Engineer, or remove a Loot Hoarder and add Novice Engineer. It's kind of personal choice whether you want to sacrifice 1 attack to draw right away, or play a creature with 1 more attack and then wait till it dies to draw a card. So moving into the Warlock, there's only, again, we're only talking about the most popular decks right now on ladder. So when you could say, oh yeah, there's a Control Reno Freeze Mage or something like that, I'm sure there are those on ladder, but is it the most popular? No. Most of the time, 90% of the time, it's going to be these 2 decks right here with, you know, the minor fluctuation of other decks that people, you know, homebrewed themselves, which again, we don't have time to go over every single deck. So looking at the Warlock decks, most of the time it's going to be the discard Zoo, but in the other circumstance, it's going to be most likely this Reno sort of Warlock that relies on N'Zoth and Lord Jaraxxus for their late game. This plays very, very similar to, if we remember Handlock at all. It's sometimes people throw in dragons. This one has a few dragons. Sometimes they even add in the Blackwing Corruptor and go even further pushing the dragon side. Still keeping, of course, the N'Zoth and the Lord Jaraxxus as their end game killer. This deck basically, you tap the entire time hoping to draw Reno. Once you draw Reno, you can be very frivolous with your health, because you can get yourself down to maybe anywhere between, I want to say 1 HP all the way up to 10ish, and then you can just drop Reno, basically restarting the game. This deck has a large quantity of late game creatures along with just Lord Draxus. That card's insane. If you play Draxus and you can live a couple turns past that, because he does reduce your health down to 15, you've basically won, because of Lord Draxus changes your hero power to 2 mana, summon a 6/6 Dread Infernal, which is, I think it's a Dread Infernal, something like that, but it still has 2-drop 6/6, and it's insane. So that's basically your win condition if N'Zoth doesn't do it for you, because again, there's a lot of warriors. Warriors know you have N'Zoth in your Warlock deck, especially a late game one like this. So you drop N'Zoth, they brawl it out, only 1 creature lives, and you're like, oh shit, well that was my win condition, and they just used 1 card and got rid of it. You drop Lord Draxus. Of course you drop Draxus after you've killed their Hellscream, but that's very very specific kind of matchups and how to beat them. But we'll talk about that once more we get into maybe a N'Zoth deck guide, but just an overview of the deck. I think that's pretty good. Looking at the probably 80, maybe 70 to 80% of ladder when you go against Warlock, it's going to be not this exact list, but something very similar to it. It's going to be the discard Warlock, which revolves around topping out at the Doomguard. There's, I believe, 3 cards in the deck, in particular discard stuff. It's the Soulfire, it's the Darkshire Librarian, and the Doomguard. From there, the Doomguards, the Librarian, and things of that nature discard stuff like the Silverware Golem, which allows it to be played for free. If you've got cards like Darkshire Councilman or Knife Juggler on the field, it combos well with that. On top of that, the new Malygos Imp allows you, for every card that's discarded, you get to redraw that many cards. So there's a lot of discard synergy within the deck, along with the fact that it's very hard for this particular deck to run out of steam, because as we know, the Warlock hero power, slap yourself in the face for 2 mana and draw a card. For those of you, I mentioned this before, that cartoon is hilarious. If you haven't seen it, somebody in the comment section will probably link it or mention which video it is, but it's hilarious. All right, so moving on to the next deck. We didn't want to talk about too much like zoo and all that stuff. Oh gosh, our green screen's messing up here. Let's see if we can fix that real quick. Oh god, we made it worse. Okay, it's getting better. Okay, not so fuzzy. All the decks such as Zoo and Freeze, we don't talk about them too long because they've been around a long time, and a lot of you guys already know about it. So heading into the Control Warrior, I actually released a deck guide on this not too long ago. It doesn't aim to kill you in 1 turn. It doesn't aim to combo you out with a mixture of cards. It basically just tries to fatigue you. I'm going to be completely honest, going against a Control Warrior is not the nicest things, and it can definitely get annoying because the whole deck basically revolves around it going 2 for 1 with most of your stuff, maybe even a 2 or maybe a 1 for 3, such as cards like Brawl. And then from there, the Warrior drops Justicar Trueheart, you can gain 4 armor a turn, and most decks only have an X amount of damage they can do, such as Freeze Mage, Miracle Rogue, Malygos Druid. They have this many creatures and this much damage, and that's the extent. There's no infinite value like the Shamans and the Thunder Bluffs. Like, that deck can continue pumping value out if you don't kill particular creatures. But in the case like Malygos Druid, Malygos is only good if you have spells, and if you've already used all your spells, it's just 4 damage. So decks like this really pry on decks that have an X amount of damage, because you can just survive up until that point, and then beyond there you just live, and your opponent's already wasted everything. So you can even beat people down with Elise, Bloodhoof Braves, and Harrison Jones, whatever comes out of your Ironforge portals. So this is a very much control, grindy, hopefully your opponent just runs out of, well, not hopefully, you make your opponent run out of stuff, and then eventually when they're slowly but surely laying there dying on the floor, you can kind of stand over them and be like, are you done? You're done? Okay, you can concede now. That's basically how this deck rolls. Moving to the next one is the Dragon Tempo Warrior. This is a deck that is, honestly, this was a tier 1 deck for and I wouldn't say a very long time, but a good amount of time. It was considered a very powerful, very annoying, curve-oriented, and can beat you down by turn 6 deck, and then Shamans kind of rose up past it. This deck is slowly but surely fiddled its way down. Oh my gosh, if you could hear that, my stomach was literally like yelling at me. I have no idea why, I'm not even hungry. but slowly but surely kind of made its way down through the tiers, and I believe this is low tier 2 or high tier 3 at the moment. Still a very powerful deck, but definitely not the greatest of the great anymore, and it revolves around basically just being able to play a very powerful minion every turn. So on turn 2, you're being able to play maybe a 3/3 with charge with Alexstrasza's Champion. Turn 3 comes a Frothing Berserker, if not dealt with, can literally kill you by turn 5 or 6. Fierce Monkey, again, great for its stats. Turn 4, a 3/6 with Taunt, very powerful. A 4/3 with charge, again, very powerful. Going into a turn 5, allowing you to either play a 4/4 that gives you +1 spell power and allows you to draw, which kind of keeps the gas going, or a Blackwing Corruptor, which is statted very nicely, a 5/4, and can deal 3 damage. From there, if your opponent, is low HP, you go ahead and throw the Crusher out there, followed by Malygos, Curator, As you can see, the curve, every drop, there's some really powerful minion that, if not dealt with, can easily just kind of overwhelm your opponent, and that's why this deck is where it is, and is still very prevalent under the warrior decks. Moving to the next one, this is a deck I would have to say it's probably the least seen warrior, but it's still, I think, a warrior deck that you guys need to be aware of. It definitely took me by surprise. If you watched our zombie priest deck testing video, I had no idea what was going on until it was too late. So this deck, this is again a type of fatigue warrior deck where it aims to set up a combo with the Cold Light Oracles, Bran, and Violet Illusionists, where when your opponent has very little cards left, they drop Bran, they play Cold Light Oracle. You draw basically 4 cards per Cold Light because their battle cries trigger twice, making you draw 8 cards in combination with Bran. You've got the Violet Illusionist out, which says when it's your turn, you cannot take damage. Which means if you're fatiguing yourself, you're not taking fatigue damage, but your opponent, on the other hand, if you make them draw 8 cards over what their normal deck capacity is, they take 1 damage, they take 2 damage. For every card they don't have, they take an extra damage. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 8, which I think is, I believe, 36 or 35 damage if they have no cards in their deck when the first card is drawn, which is a pretty solid win condition if you can pull it off. So basically, every other card in the deck, the Fool's Bane, the Brawl, the Ironforge Portal, the Justicar, the Gorehowl, the Bashes, the Slams, everything is built around killing your opponent's stuff, making them run out of resources, surviving until you can put the combo together, draw the cards you need, drop the Emperor Tharzan, discount the cards so you can all play them in one turn, and then just go from there. Because normally you can't play double Cold Light, Bran, and the Violet Illusionist in one turn. But if you can go ahead and discount those cards, all of a sudden they become 2 mana and you can play them all in one turn, which again enables the combo. So a very particular deck, requires a very specific form of play. It has a very specific win condition, but if you can meet that every single game, the deck is very, very powerful. And it's actually not that hard to do because a lot of people don't know this deck. Which I didn't know. Once you see it, it's kind of easier to play around, but a lot of players, you don't see decks like this often, and when you do, you should probably know how to beat it, or at least how it wins, so you can go on and beat it through that. So heading into the Rogue, we're going to talk about, this is an interesting one. This was not in the last monthly report, neither was that last warrior deck. The N'Zoth Rogue. So normally I always just include the Miracle Rogue in the list, or the Malygos Rogue, but because the N'Zoth Rogue actually popped up and is being played more and more because it seems to be getting refined to the point where it's good enough to play at those higher ranks, we're gonna go ahead and talk about it. So again, this deck, I need a drink. Hold on, guys. So of course, with it being a N'Zoth deck, its late game finisher is playing the N'Zoth, but until then, this deck has a lot of resources to be able to do a good amount of damage early. The Undercity Hucksters and the Swashbucklers give you a lot of value for not that high price of a mana. I mean, you're taking cards from your opponent's class, which can be some of the best cards in the game. Again, there's a little bit of RNG with this deck due to the fact that Undercity Huckster, Journey from Below, and Swashbuckler are kind of random effects, with the Journey Below being a discover mechanic, which is a little bit better than just a random effect, but it's still, if you get bad RNG and you're just not getting decent cards, the deck will kind of blow up in your face. But besides that, you've got good cards such as the Shadow Strike, the SI Agent, the Raptor. The reason there's only one Raptor is the fact that you have to have something on the board, and if you're playing against maybe a Zoo deck where the whole entire point of Zoo is to make sure your opponent doesn't have stuff, and if you've got cards like Raptor that just don't actively do anything to get you from behind, to get you at least compared to your opponent or ahead, you're going to eventually lose that game. So a lot of these cards have like some sort of comeback mechanic, whether it's sort of Fan of Knives, the South Sea Squid Face, you know, it's a 4/4 for 4, but when it dies, it actually gives you a better weapon, which can allow you to come back. Only 1 sap because this deck doesn't really revolve around winning through like a burst of damage through removing maybe a taunt minion or something annoying. This is definitely a very control-based deck, and aims to maybe not whittle your opponent down to nothing, but make sure that this deck always has board control, in a sense that it's going to be able to keep kind of picking at your opponent's health, or at least picking at their creatures, and then follow up with that big N'Zoth. So heading into the Malygos Druid, this is, I don't want to say it's the same as the Miracle Druid, or not the Miracle Druid, the Miracle Rogue, because it uses Cold Bloods and Leroy Jenkins to win, but this definitely goes by using, instead of maybe a creature and then cards that buff up the creature, this uses spells and then cards to draw those specific spells. So you've got cards like Fan of Knives in this deck, Shiv, you've got your Auctioneer, the combo with a lot of your cheap spells. You've got the, you don't have Conceal in this deck because, again, it's not the Miracle Rogue that uses Cold Bloods and Leroy's Conceal and then do large quantity of damage over 2 turns. This, again, you use Malygos and you use your Sinister Strikes, your Evisces, your Shivs, and even your Fan of Knives to clear boards, which I've seen do it. Oh my gosh, if a Malygos lives in this particular rogue deck and they can just Fan of Knives, Shadow Strike, and get good Sinisters and backstabs, it's just insane because they're using literally 1 to 2 cost spells to deal with 8-drop minions because of how powerful Malygos is. So again, this deck uses Emperor, enables combos with Malygos, and does a large quantity of damage in 1 turn. So very similar to kind of the Malygos Druid, but it definitely has a different win condition than the Miracle Rogue, which is normally what we talk about, but it seems that Miracle Rogue's going down and Malygos Rogue is going up. It's kind of just a meta shifting thing. I don't play Rogue often, so I don't know what springs up Malygos versus Miracle, but I know definitely the win condition of one is Cold Bloods and Leroy's, and this one's definitely Malygos and Sinister Strikes in combination with Emperor. I cannot believe I forgot the Paladin, guys, so sorry about that. There's 2 Paladin decks that you need to watch out for on ladder, both of them being very control-based. The first one we're going to talk about is the N'Zoth Paladin, which uses very powerful death rattle creatures such as Tyrion, Sylvanas, Karen, and even Infested Tarns, because when you bring them back, they have Taunt, and then it brings out again that slime that comes out of the Tarn. So it uses a big N'Zoth kind of summon to be able to bring back a lot of sticky minions that have abilities passed when they die, such as either give yourself a weapon, steal an opponent's minion, or just keep bringing out very annoying creatures. But until you get to playing those death rattle creatures, or even N'Zoth at all, you've got cards like Peacekeeper, Wild Pyromancer Equalities, Doomsayers, and Forbidden Healings, just a bunch of field clear, a bunch of heals, and just a bunch of annoying stuff for your opponent to have to get past. On top of that, you've got cards like Harvest Golem and Elise and Infested Tarn that make up a pretty sizable and decent middle game that allow you to compete with a lot of different creatures. The True Silver Champions is of course nice, but basically just using these cards to maybe not push a ton of damage, because you definitely have the option to try to push a lot of damage in the mid game if your opponent doesn't react to you, but most of the time you're just trying to keep what they've got going on at bay until you can get enough of your death rattles to die, get in a nice stable position, play your N'Zoth. They can't deal with the board, they either concede or they run out of steam. But the unfortunate part of this deck is again the N'Zoth. So let's say you either don't draw into your death rattles, or your opponent uses a big board clear like a Twisting Nether, a Flame Strike, a Brawl, and it deals with your N'Zoth. I've actually included a backup plan, which is the Elise. A lot of the N'Zoth Paladins don't have the Elise in the deck because N'Zoth is normally fine on its own, but I found because of how many control warriors are out right now, and because of how many people are trying Priest, I think the Elise is pretty good in this deck. But I do think the Murloc Paladin deck, which is another form of control Paladin here, is a very powerful deck, and I think a little bit more consistent than the N'Zoth Paladin, just because the N'Zoth Paladin uses the N'Zoth basically at its win condition, and then Elise, which is another form of very slow. But the Murloc Paladin, its burst potential is huge. Once you basically play the second Anyfin and maybe even a third one if you can get it through Ivory Knight, you're being able to push 35, 40 damage plus in one turn, and that's only on 2 Anyfins. If you get the third one, I don't even want to know what disgusting how buff the Murlocs are at that point. And as you can see, the deck's core is very, very similar. It has Equality, Consecration, the Forbidden Healings, the Wild Pyromancers, the Doomsayers, the True Silver Champions, the Consecration, the Barns, the Solemn Vigil. So a lot of the core cards are still there. Tyrion, it's just the win condition has shifted from a Death Rattly resummon board control to a one-turn kill sort of plan. And then a lot of questions every time I post this deck are, why is there no Murloc Knight? Murloc Knight doesn't have charge, and it doesn't buff other Murlocs. It's not a bad card, but it doesn't work into that one-turn kill, you know, burst your opponent down like the Bluegills and the Murloc War Leaders, because the War Leaders buff the Bluegills, and the Bluegills can attack right away, as the Murloc Knight can't attack right away, and it doesn't buff anything. You have to use your hero power, and that's, again, goes right against the one-turn kill thing, which Anyfin can happen, activates. So now that we've kind of gone over Paladin, keep in mind there is an aggressive form of Paladin right now that runs the N'Zoth, but it also runs the Mysterious Challenger, which breaks out secrets. It's basically just a bad N'Zoth Paladin in my opinion, and I don't want to put bad decks on here, and I'd rather just put the standard N'Zoth Paladin, and it should beat out that secret Paladin 9 times out of 10. So with that, let's head on over, and I'm sorry, I forgot Paladin. There it is. So for the longest time, Priest was not included in our monthly meta, but now, for the first time ever, we have a deck to show. And I think you guys know exactly what deck we're gonna show if you watched our deck testing video, and that's going to be the Zombie Priest. Some call it the Resurrect Priest, some call it the Bogchamp Priest. And this deck, very, very fun, very, very interesting. Maybe not the highest of tier, but very fun at that. And it revolves around playing cards such as Barns. And Barns brings out maybe a Rag or a Bog Creeper. It's only a 1/1, so your opponent's going to want to kill it. And then you follow up with a Resurrect or maybe a Onyx Bishop. And that's going to bring back your Rag, your Bog. And you're just going to keep bringing back these really annoying Death Rattle creatures like Sylvanas, Karen, Bog, Ragnaros. You can even throw a Ysera in the deck. And through your Onyx Bishop and your Resurrect card, you have the ability to basically bring back 4 creatures. And hopefully these 4 creatures are some of your more powerful ones like Bloodhoof, Sylvanas, Bog. And eventually your opponent will not be able to deal with all of these creatures, because not only they are dealing with them when you play them, they're dealing with them after you play them through cards like the 2-mana Bring It Back. And then you've got cards like your Injured Blade Master, which is your early game, so maybe you can't get to the point where you play Bog. You keep resurrecting a 4/7. That's pretty annoying for most classes to get rid of, especially if you're playing against another Priest. So I would actually almost rather keep bringing back Injured Blade Masters than anything else, because 4-mana creatures against a Priest it's horrible. The Priest has nothing to deal with 4-mana cards. And then it uses Soul Priest, Holy Nova, and Excavated Evil to deal with all the Shamans and the Zoos and the aggro hunters. And then from there, you just play big taunts, heal yourself back up, GG, no re. And the deck is super fun, super annoying. If for every one of these videos that I've done the deck on, I'll throw that like in an annotation just so you guys can see the deck in action if you want to, check it out before you play it. But if I have the decks, I'll throw in an annotation for you guys, because I know seeing the deck played is almost more important than, just seeing the deck played is good. So moving into Hunter, sorry we only had one Priest deck, but that is the only one that's currently found on ladder. You could maybe run into an N'Zoth Priest every once in a while, but most of the time it's going to be that Resurrect Priest. So Hunter is our last one. I'm going to need another drink. My voice is killing me. This has been a long recording. All right. So there's going to be 2 particular Hunter decks you're going to see on ladder for the most part. Both of them are very similar. This one being a more mid-rangey, but still a secret Hunter at that, with the new secret as Cat Trick and the the Cloaked Huntress This is such a huge combo. So you play Secret Keepers on 1. You can either coin or just play a normal secret on 2. Then you play the Cloaked Huntress with maybe 1 or 2 more secrets. Your Secret Keeper is a 3/4, a 4/5. You have a Cloaked Huntress down. You've got 2 or 3 secrets down, and it's just too much for your opponent to deal with. And by the time, you know, they figured out what the traps are, or they've popped them, you're already down to 10 to 15 health. And then by then the hunter can either just rush you down with what they've got on the board, or they can just beat you down with kill commands and things of that nature. So definitely a very, very powerful deck right now. It's kind of interesting. The dust value is exactly 5,000. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Also, the Barnes in the Hunter deck, with most of the cards in this deck being spells, it has a high chance of pulling cards such as Infested Wolf, Savannah Highmane, which is obviously the best. Cards like Ragnaros. You whip out the Ragnaros on turn 4. At the end of your turn, deal 8 damage. That's huge. Even a Kindly Grandmother is pretty good, or even a Secret Keeper because of all the secrets you play in the deck. So almost every card besides Houndmaster, I'm pretty sure that's the only card in this deck that would be bad. Oh no, even the Cloaked Huntress is good because you could play Barnes on 4, get a Cloaked Huntress, and then play all the secrets in your hand. So I would have to say the only card that doesn't actually have an ability when it comes out with Barnes is Houndmaster, and that's some great value. Again, this is more of the mid-rangey version of the Secret Hunter list. We're going to move into our last deck here. I don't think we left out any particular classes, but if I did, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure we hit on everything. And this is going to be the Face Hunter list, but as you can see, it still has a lot of the secrets in it, such as the Hat Trick, Explosive Trap, the Freezing Trap, the Snake Trap. There's still a lot of secrets in this deck. It just doesn't use the Cloaked Huntress and the Savannah Highmanes. This deck, making sure you have turn 1 plays, make sure you have turn 2 plays, turn 3 plays, turn not so much 4 plays, but you just keep playing all of these low drop creatures, being able to do basically as much damage to your opponent's face as possible, making sure you maximize your hero power button. So let's say, you know, it's turn 3, you either can play Unleash the Hounds to deal 2 damage to face, or an Eagle Horn Bow, or you can play a 1-drop Fiery Bat and Hero Power. It's probably best to go Fiery Bat, Hero Power, just to kind of maximize your damage there and to play as much as you can. This is definitely one of the, I would have to say, the fastest decks at the moment, besides maybe Face Shaman in the game. Definitely, when you're playing this deck, most people are going to assume it's going to be the Super Secret Hunter, and this deck doesn't have a lot of variance from that, besides just being a faster version of it. So you're not getting any basically edge over playing this versus the other one. So I actually prefer the other one because it does have some late game tendencies with the Rag and the Call the Wild. But if you're looking to play very quick games on ladder because you just either don't have a lot of time or you just want to grind through the ranks and just basically practice with the deck, I think this is a good way to start and then move to the more mid-rangey secret or Super Secret Hunter, just so you can get some more games in there. And it's basically, it's going to run the same. And I lied, this does run the Cloaked Huntress. For some reason I didn't see it there at the bottom. But yes, please don't yell at me in the comments. You said there's no Cloaked Huntress, and there it is. I just didn't see it under the Leroy. Leroy, it's just one of those cards that everything near it just gets absorbed because it's a Leroy Jenkins. So with that, we've hit all 9 of the classes, all the most popular decks within those classes. Hopefully you've enjoyed and you get a better understanding of what to expect in this November month of decks to kind of run into on ladder. If I've missed anything or you'd like to add on to anything I've said, as I can't go over every single thing I want to, as that video would be like 2 hours long, and no one wants to hear me ramble about random shit that long. Leave that in the comment section below, and I'm sure a lot of people will gain a lot of insight from reading into what other players have to say, in addition to what I'm saying, or maybe opposed to what I'm saying. Everybody has opinions, and maybe I was wrong, and that's fine. So as always, guys, hopefully you've enjoyed, and good luck there. Good luck out there on the November ladder. I'm sure it'll be tough, but you guys can do it. So as always, I'm Warshack, of course, and happy whatever the hell day it is.